Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tehmina Kaoosji. Niaga Spotlight takes us through the week in economic analysis and future affairs. Now today on Analysis, our spotlight is straight on Budget 2026 and tax strategy for Malaysia's tech leap. As we count down to Budget 2026, Malaysia's tech ambitions are at a pretty crucial crossroads. Budget 2025 was the country's largest ever, 421 billion ringgit, including 86 billion ringgit for development projects, and also introduced a new investment incentive framework backed by a 1 billion ringgit strategic fund to support high growth, high value, the 8GHV sectors. Now, export tax incentives were also expanded to cover integrated circuit or IC design, a move aimed at pulling Malaysia further up the semiconductor value chain. Now, at the heart of this push is the National Semiconductor Strategy, which targets 500 billion ringgit in public and private investments over the next decade, with 25 billion ringgit in fiscal support for Phase 1 alone. So far, 63 billion ringgit in semiconductor commitments have been secured, mostly from foreign players. Still, competition is fierce. Vietnam, India, Indonesia are aggressively rolling out tax packages to attract chip makers and design hubs. With OECD global minimum tax rules now in effect, Malaysia can no longer rely on outdated tax holidays. It must deliver Pillar 2 compliant, stable incentives and clear policies that de-risk long-term investments. With these global markets shifting and export markets tightening, Budget 2026 needs to move beyond rhetoric and place execution clarity at the center. So today we ask, can Malaysia design a tax playbook bold enough to transform its semiconductor sector and digital economy? Joining me for this most timely discussion is Keegan Ong, tax partner and Korean desk leader at PwC Malaysia, to break down the fiscal levers to get right. Very good morning, Keegan. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm good. Thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. So, Keegan, a very timely discussion, and let's move into it by looking first at the importance of stability and predictability for long-term semiconductor investments. A couple of thoughts first, moving from here.
Sure. I suppose going back to the earlier point that you mentioned, Tehmina, just now, Malaysia as a nation, I think we have been doing very great in the semiconductor or the E&E sectors, whereby we do have a lot of global players, local players that are doing very well in these sectors. So, in terms of stability and predictability in terms of the tax regime is indeed critical, because when we talk about these kind of sectors, the E&E sectors, semicon sectors, it's not something, the durations for them to actually to build out the plant, for them to get into operations, to make profits, it takes about more than 5 years to 10 years generally, right?
That's right.
So, over the years, for the past few years, if you look at it from a tax perspective, tax policy perspective, I think government has introduced various measures, for the example, introductions of capital gains tax, updates to dividend taxations, the rollout of in-invoicing. All this, it reflects the Malaysia commitment, to fiscal sustainability, as well as, to actually to comply with global best practices. So while these changes are necessary, but it then actually creates challenges for businesses because they are keep moving. The tax rules are keep changing. But on top of that, I think what you have mentioned just now is the incentive framework. I think that is a good move that the government has introduced, to provide certainty for foreign investors as well as domestic players when it comes to tax incentive, in the sense that, what they have introduced and mentioned in the budget is the new incentive framework will be an outcome-based and tiered approach. Mm-hmm. So what does that really mean to general in public is that, if you want to entitle to certain tax incentive based on your investment in Malaysia, you must ensure that you are able to deliver the commitment that you actually promise. So generally, the commitment covers, capex investment, building the plant, buying land in Malaysia. We also talk about, hire of Malaysian employees. The number of employees that can be conditions to the incentive. So what the outcome base means, if the investor has committed to all these conditions, they must ensure that they are able to deliver and achieve in order for them to enjoy the basic tax incentive, right? If they are able to do more than that, in addition to the basic requirements, for example, they're going to partner with local suppliers, local vendors, they're going to hire more employees, they're going to get interns to work in their companies, or they can also, to meet certain ESG requirements, for example, talking about environmental, right? So if they're able to achieve more than the standard conditions, then they will be able to enjoy a better incentive.
Exactly.
So,
it's like a give and take sort of a framework. And ideally speaking then, Keegan, it also perhaps places Malaysia in a more competitive stead as opposed to lots of neighboring countries which are already offering multi-year guarantees.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, you know, I like the idea of outcome-based because it really ties back to what you can deliver. Because the old model or the old regime itself is that, you know, whether there's proper monitoring, you know, whether the investors actually deliver what they have committed. Because at the end of the day, you see, when government gives the incentive, what the government is actually is losing tax revenue, right?
Exactly.
So,
correct.
you know, we must...
In exchange for, you know, setting up of businesses and multiplying factors for the economy.
But what is also important is we must ensure they actually deliver what they have committed. So that's why, you know, the model has changed. In the past, you know, if the government do monitor or do, you know, generally the the evaluations or the assessment will be done through a tax audit by the tax authority. If the company so happen did not subject to tax audit, and then no one will actually know that whether they are meeting the conditions or not. So, you know, the outcome-based and tier approach, I think, is something that is really helpful because that provides certainty to investors that, you know, at the upfront, they already know they need to deliver this in order for them to enjoy the incentive.
Absolutely. So that is a framework which makes a lot of sense. However, now let's go a little bit deeper, Keegan, into looking at incentives which drive spillovers to local suppliers. The fact of the matter is, of course, as the ecosystem was set up over the past 50-odd years, big semiconductor players were often the ones who received the benefits, the lion's share of tax incentives. So it's not so much about completely shifting the focus to the local suppliers, but sort of balancing the books a little more, right?
Okay. So perhaps, I think that's the perceptions, Tehmina, because when the government actually provide the tax incentive, the incentive itself does not differentiate whether you are foreign players or your local companies. As long as you meet the conditions, right, and you are providing the so-called promoted activities or you are producing promoted products, you would then entitle yourself to apply for the incentive, right? But it's just that I think perceptionally, people think that generally only big players can entitle to that. So that is something that I suppose, you know, for local players, they probably have to go back and take a look, right, in terms of what they are doing, whether they can qualify for incentive or
whether it applies under the fine print in a sense.
Correct. So talking about the local ecosystem, those kind of stuff, I suppose in some of the informations or conversations with the government authorities, I think the new incentive framework is very much to actually to develop the industry as a whole. Right? Because if you look at in the past, when we talk about incentive for the E&E sectors or the semicon, a lot of it focusing on the downstream activities.
Very
right?
true, correct.
Not about the upstream whereby design, those kind of stuff, right?
And downstream is clearly, I mean, Malaysia contributes to up to 13% of that activity.
Yep.
It's a bountiful market, but it's lower value compared to, of course, the higher.
Correct. That is also because I think in the past, what happened is our incentive regime, it goes by, you know, whether the activities fall within the promoted list or not. You know, if you go to MIDA being the principal promotion agency in Malaysia, so all incentive will go to them. They have a promoted list of activities and product. So in order for you to entitle to incentive, the first test is whether the activities is fall under that list or not.
Understood.
It's a positive list, right? And if you look at it in the E&E sectors, like what you mentioned, we're focusing a lot on packaging, you know, those kind of things. And I think moving forward, what would be helpful is actually to expand, you know, the activities or the products to a wider coverage, whereby it covers from design all the way down to you know, packaging or whatever. Whereby, you know, we should actually evaluate the investments more holistic, you know, looking at it, what are the contributions with that activities to the ecosystem itself, rather than just on the product. So I think that would be helpful. And, you know, one of the conditions or generally what investors need to do is they need to provide certain commitment in terms of how they're going to cooperate with local vendors. Because I think with their presence in Malaysia, certainly there will be technology transfers, knowledge transfers to the local vendors. Yeah.
Absolutely. And perhaps looking beyond possible transfers to local vendors, etc., could there perhaps be possible deductions actually put into place to encourage this from the get-go, particularly for the MNCs who may have the capacity already to do this?
I think that could be an option that government can explore, right? So I think what you are trying to say is, let's say they participate or collaborate with local vendors,
sure,
they get certain tax benefits, right? But one perceptions that I want to correct as well, a lot of people think that tax incentive is magic. You know, it can do a
it's
lot
a silver
of
bullet.
things. All right.
Yeah.
But I think in addition to tax incentive, what the investors or the local players are looking at is also, you know, whether the infrastructure itself is good enough for the industry. Talent, I think, I deal a lot with investors. I think one of the challenges that they're really facing is actually to get the right talent, right? Of course, then, you know, raw material, you know, whether there's a availability in terms of the raw material, those are the things that really important. So, you know, tax incentive can be a booster to enhance the investors, to entice the investors to come to in Malaysia. But I think we have to look at it from an overall perspective, how, you can actually make it more attractive in that sense. Yeah.
Now, speaking about making the entire ecosystem more attractive, let's touch on what you'd mentioned a little earlier, which is looking at ESG alignment. Now, of course, naturally, these are all energy-intensive industries, and they're notoriously water-intensive in particular as well. So, how could potentially Budget 2026 integrate green tech, low-carbon transition incentives and bake it into the system?
Okay. Presently, I think we do have quite a number of incentives pertaining to green, right? We have the GITA, G-I-T-A, Green Investment Tax Allowance. We have the Green Investment Tax exemption as well. So that basically, I think the government has introduced that a few years ago to encourage companies, local companies, or even local players to adopt the use of green assets, green equipment, green building, etc. Right? One thing that we have not have is on the carbon tax itself, right? I think last year the government did mention in the budget that we are working towards that, because to implement the carbon tax mechanism in Malaysia is not so straightforward, because you need to have relevant agencies and ministries to be on board as well, because you need to have the policy itself in place, right? And then you need to set the pricing, and then you need to determine how the tax mechanism will work. So hopefully we could see more information this year in 2026 budget, because it was already announced in the past budget that the government is preparing for that. So hopefully there will be something.
Absolutely. And there's also, I think, the wider global landscape whereby suppliers are having their own decarbonization goals.
Yep.
So it might be good to already set this in place, because then perhaps Malaysia could take advantage of the so-called green premium, because low carbon credentials could actually lift the average selling price of product coming out of Malaysia, right?
Exactly. That's right.
So there's a lot to be done, and hopefully a couple of the Budget 2026 announcement will lead back to clearer direction on what we can be doing with these frameworks.
Yes.
Well, Keegan, thank you so much for the conversation so far. Lots more to dig into, but we do take a short break. We'll be right back after with Niaga Spotlight. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Niaga Spotlight. Still with me, Tehmina Kaoosji, and today I have Keegan Ong, tax partner with PwC Malaysia, looking at Budget 2026 and tax for the tech ecosystem. So Keegan, going straight back into the discussion, let's now focus on global minimum tax, GMT, transfer pricing, as well as competitiveness, and what this means for Malaysia, particularly with the OECD Pillar 2 coming into effect for the financial year of 2025.
Okay. So I guess, before we get into the details, I think it's good for everyone to know about what is Pillar 2, right? So Pillar 2 generally means that it applies on multinationals, big multinationals with certain revenue threshold. So as a group, if their revenue threshold is 750 million euro, then they will fall under Pillar 2. So what does that really mean to Malaysia is, if you look at the category of investors, so there will be a group of investors that fall under Pillar 2 because they are big enough. there is another category of investors that don't fall within the Pillar 2, right? So when we talk about incentive, if you look at it from a Malaysia context, traditionally, we rely quite heavily using incentive as a tool to actually attract investors to
That's
come
right.
into Malaysia.
The usual tax holidays whereby you could get a decade, maybe more even.
Correct. And that not only happened in Malaysia, I think within the ASEAN region, I think these countries are using different type of incentive to get people to come in. So with Pillar 2 in place, what that means is, for companies that fall into the Pillar 2 category, they have a minimum tax to pay, right? So if they invest in Malaysia and the Malaysian government granted them tax incentive and then they don't pay a minimum tax of 15%, they have to pay the tax somewhere else, be it in their home country or whatever, right? So in order for us to really encounter that situations, I think the incentive framework that the government is working on is supposed to be announced this year, right? The details has already taken into account, how to address all these challenges. Like I mentioned, I think it should cater for two categories of investors. So then you talk about transfer pricing, right? I think transfer pricing is something that it happens, when there's related party transactions. In short, it means that the transaction between a related party has to be at arm's length. So if you go to market to buy the same product or service from a third party, the pricing should be similar, right? So that you don't get into a situation whereby you're trying to put more profits to a lower tax country. So with transfer pricing, this helps to mitigate these kind of situations as well as tax leakages. So competitiveness that you asked about just now, how to remain competitive. I think with the new incentive framework, I think that would help. Tax incentive may not be the only tools moving forward to really attract investments. We may need to look at whether government grant, how to develop the ecosystem to be more business friendly, business competitive. I think those are the things or areas that the government should actually focus on.
And basically competing on areas of certainty as well as speed, just for ease of business, right? Correct. Because that ultimately is what not only attracts investors, but also ensures that they stay on. So perhaps when we look at the kind of disputes that semiconductor multinationals may come into in the future, do you feel there's an opportunity for Malaysia to maybe brand a rules-based regime, sort of, which actually anchors long-term capex as a focus?
Potentially, I think that could be an area, because I think moving forward, what the I think the government direction is also, when investors come to Malaysia to really sell their plant, their businesses, we want the high value kind of activities that are really being actually undertaken in Malaysia, as compared in the past that you only come here to do some simple work, simple assembly kind of things.
Entry-level manufacturing, yeah.
So I think we want to move to a higher, within the value chain to a higher level. So I think that would help. But of course, I think going back to the earlier point is, I think we need to ensure that there is a good ecosystem to really support all these activities to happen.
Absolutely. So speaking of that, point to ponder would be building that digital and design hub capacity, right, Keegan? So what sort of tax policies could perhaps incentivize higher value activities?
Actually, currently, our incentive already designed in a manner that to incentivize a little bit more, or I mean they can get a better package compared to a normal activities. Example, I think if you look at the present incentive, the two categories are pioneer status or income tax exemptions.
That's right.
So it generally in the form that you either get 70% exemption or 100% exemptions for a period of 5 years or 10 years or more than that. So how do government actually differentiate, should I give you 70% or should I give you 100%? It really depends on the activities that you're going to perform. One of the consideration is, if your activities comprises a lot of high technology, it brings high value, it creates a lot of talent, you requires a lot of vendor corporations locally. So that will actually give a better rating for you to get a better incentive. So presently, they are already taken into considerations. But like I mentioned earlier, the current tax regime is going based on a positive list per se. You must fall within that list in order for you to get incentive. So moving forward, I suppose, for government to consider is whether it can be the other way, whereby to evaluate the incentive, the investors have to bring their business case to the government to showcase that, why should government incentivize them and what they can actually deliver to the country as a whole. And, what are their commitments, how are they going to develop the ecosystems in Malaysia. I think that would be a better way.
And absolutely, these highest value stages of the semiconductor chain, we're talking about EDA software, cloud AI infrastructure, all of these are still, perhaps the best term might be nascent industry-wise, right? So from there, actually, what would be interesting is looking at administrative certainty and also speed for investors. Because investors, of course, they usually cite regulatory barriers, bottlenecks, as well as slow approvals. So looking at the entire tax ecosystems and administration-wise, what can be done to smoothen the process even further?
Okay. A couple of points here. I agree. I think when it comes to applying for incentive, setting up companies in Malaysia, it does take some time, all right? But if you look at ASEAN, we are not so bad, to be very frank. Because I handle quite a lot of investors' cases. We also hear from them. We also talk to our colleagues in other countries.
Sure.
We are not too bad, actually. If you look at the ease of doing business ranking, we're probably just behind Singapore in the ASEAN region. But coming back to that, I think we can do better, right? If you look at the current processes when it comes to applying for incentive, I think the two principal agencies in Malaysia is MIDA as well as MDEC, depending on which industry you are. So digital will then generally go for MDEC. The manufacturing side of activities will go to MIDA. In fact, I think I must actually say that they have improved a lot in terms of the speed of evaluations, assessing the applications, because a lot of it is now online based. It's online because they use systems to actually capture the data. But of course, I think how to make it better, how to make it more friendly to investors. My advice is really, for investors, they perhaps can actually reach out to professionals to really to work together in terms of building up the business case to make the applications. Because a lot of the matters, based on my experience in dealing with them is, it requires financial projections. You need to build out a business case whereby, as a business owner, depending, whether you are big companies or you are multinational, you may have resources to actually to prepare or have knowledge or experience to do that. For a smaller kind of entities or corporates, they may not have that experience.
The decision-making and reducing investor risk takes a significant amount of capital as well as resources, right?
Correct. So, I think we are on the right track as a nation. It's just a matter what we need to ensure is we review periodically, we get feedback from the investors, from the professionals, from the businesses, how to make it more conducive, the environment more conducive for investors or businesses in Malaysia. I think that is something that we really need to do.
Absolutely. And as we move towards landing the conversation, I just want to touch a little on a real bugbear when it comes to any expansion for especially AGHV industries, our lack of domestic talent. In particular, when it comes to the semicon, AI and related industries, we're only producing about 5,000 engineering graduates, for example, per year. That is a huge deficit, considering that we need in excess of perhaps 50 to 60,000 by 2030, Keegan. Any ideas about how the kind of JV deals between multinationals who want to settle themselves here, as well as talent grooming and upskilling, could perhaps coalesce and help fill this gap for Malaysia? Because we are likely not going to be able to do it if we're relying only on the numbers of straight graduates coming out of our institutions, right?
Yep. So I think there are a couple of initiatives that is ongoing. For the investors that coming to invest in Malaysia, they are required to actually collaborate with local universities. In what sense, it's like one way could be getting some of the students to be as interns in those companies. Secondly, is also they could have certain special program or specific program with universities on certain subject or area, right? So in a way to really to develop the next generations, when, to prepare them to come out to the working environment. Of course, I think there are many Malaysians outside of Malaysia as well.
Absolutely,
right?
that's so true too.
So, whether tax incentive or tax measures can be one way or one option to really to attract them to come back.
Yeah, that brain circulation which we want to be having.
Correct.
Yeah.
So those are things that I think the government may consider, because currently there are already incentives for those that return to Malaysia to work here.
Clearly. And some final thoughts then, Keegan, as we close out, looking at how Budget 2026 can also ensure that tax tools are reaching our smaller players in the ecosystems, in particular the SMEs. We've got a very thriving SMEs which lead, particularly in Penang, for example. We've got over 3,000 of them feeding into about 350 excess of the MNCs who deal in chips, etc., E&E.
Okay. Again, I think the perception is, people always think that tax incentives or any tax measures only apply to big corporates. That's not the true situations. So, what they can really see, really evaluate or assess for the SME is really, to get some, they can actually reach out to tax authorities, to their tax agents, to explore any of the incentives they can actually apply for.
The applicability for
Correct, correct. Because tax incentive itself does not distinguish whether you are big or small companies. Although in certain situations, they may have paid out capital requirements, right? That could be a hurdle for the SME, but generally, we don't. And just to cover up, put on another point is, Tehmina, is I think we do have incentive for SME as well, right? So I think what the government can perhaps to consider is also, to find out what are the pain point of the MSME, and then to be more targeted, to help them to strive to the next level. And what is important is also, I think, we need to monitor whether the incentives able to deliver the outcome that the government wants or not, right? Because every year budget, we do have a lot of proposals.
That's right. And it's not just about announcing the budget, but also so much needs to go into monitoring. Keegan, thank you so much for the very interesting conversation and lots of insights about tax-related strategy for Malaysia's tax lead. Pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you.
Well, Malaysia's future in tech won't be won by ambition alone. It will be decided by precision and speed. Budget 2026 will be a stress test of how quickly we can align tax policy, talent, and technology to outpace competitors. The choices made now will shape our economy potentially for years to come. That's all we have time for today. We'll see you again next week with more economic analysis and insights. I'm Tehmina Kaoosji signing off for now. Here's to a productive week ahead.